that will later be present to the speakers. Firstly, we will have the participation of Dr. Madeleine Arnot, Emerita Professor of Sociology of Education at Jesus College, University of Cambridge. She's considered a leading international expert on Bernsteinian social reproduction theory and on promoting equality and social justice through education, especially in relation to gender and refugee children. He is a fellow of the Academy of Social Science and holds an honorary doctorate for service to the democracy and education from the University of Uppsala, Sweden. His work has taken here around the world. She has held visiting fellowship in Spain, Portugal, Greece, Sweden, Norway, Canada, the US, South Africa, and Japan. She has been an international...
La victoria de la causa por la libertad en todas partes.
She has been an international policy consultant on equality and education for the Council of Europe, UNESCO, UNICEF, the Royal Swedish Academy of Science in Sweden, and the Center for Social Justice in Ireland. She has offered expert advice to the Ministers of Education and Equality of the 6 in Greece, Luxembourg, Spain, and Portugal, and also the Minister of Culture and Education in Argentina. Education in Argentina. Furthermore, we will have the participation of Luis David Fernandez Zambrano, current professor and director of the Chair for Culture of Peace and Human Rights and the Faculty of Social Science, University of Buenos Aires. He is the author of numerous books and articles related to legal theory, constitutional law, labor law, human rights, and education and culture. He is currently working with Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, in the search for peaceful and democratic solution to the various political and educational challenges of the modern world. I wish to point out that Professor Madeleine Arnot will have 25 to 30 minutes to present her insightful contribution to the subjects, followed by Luis David Fernandez Zambrano. You will have a similar amount of time. Professor Madeleine Arnot, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much. That is very kind of you. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be here and joining this seminar for the Center of Peace and Human Rights, and involved in even a little small way in the extraordinary history of Dr. Pérez Esquivel and his fight for social justice. We are clearly here standing on the shoulders of giants. I'd also like to thank Professor Zambrano for his invitation to and his patience for setting up this seminar, and also for the audience today that are listening in. And I'm welcome to learn about your questions. I'm especially delighted about the theme that I've chosen because it relates very well to the work of Dr. Pérez Esquivel. In the 2021 book, The Power of Hope, Thoughts of Peace and Human Rights in the Third Millennium, there was discussions with Dr. Pérez Esquivel and the Japanese Buddhist leader Daisaku Ikeda. And there's a chapter called Women, the Driving Force of a Century of Life. Here, Dr. Pérez Esquivel argued, women's silent revolution of the conscience will generate new social paradigms. And that is the challenge that we've set ourselves today. My goal over the last 50 years, I've been an academic for a very long time, has been precisely as an educationist and also a feminist academic, to think what sort of new moral ethos could help bond humanity together and address the challenges of social inequality and social justice. My engagement has taken me, as you've heard, all the way around the world. And wherever I go, I hear that critical theorists debating how do we hold on to the civilizing humanitarian impulse of education? How do we hold on to that impulse and its fundamental agenda of educating all, irrespective of wealth, status, membership, age, sexuality, gender, ability, and ethnicity? That is the humanitarian impulse of education. Now, I'm one of the idealistic post-Second World War generation who believe that education systems have a huge role to play in the struggle for peace and social justice. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the right to education, is represented as unassailable. It is a fundamental human right. And it's actually one of the few rights in some contexts which is left. There are many rights that have been taken away in contemporary society, and it is the last one standing, if you like, is the right to education. The rights about security, welfare, housing, and health are very often under threat. But it's not clear that everyone has those rights to education. If we look at the plight of girls in Afghanistan, of the poor in society, of migrant families, and the difficulty of children faced with special needs, we can see how difficult it is to take up those rights. We're now in a world dominated by neoliberal ideology and populist politics, having to fight for everyone just to have, if you like, the right to have rights. So we're in another level of struggle of the right to have rights. Now, during my career, I've addressed a whole range of inequalities in education, from social class inequality, devastating stratifications that lead so much of the potential of the new generation unfilled, gender power relations, restrictive impact on the schooling of girls, and we're now seeing a backlash to that. I've focused on the hegemonic forms of masculinity. I've focused on poverty of young citizens. I've focused on the education of asylum seekers and refugee children. This is a whole range of inequalities that anyone concerned needs to address at some level because they're all intersecting. There's a connectedness between these inequalities. But in fact, as I move forward, I'm actually going backwards, and I'm going backwards to what I think is what is the role of critical sociology? What is sociology for? And in a way, I've gone back to my roots, which I started at as a student, was the work of Émile Durkheim, the French sociologist, who said in the late 19th century that we should focus on the science of morality. And I think that's a really interesting concept for us today, of understanding social change and what it means for social solidarity, what form of morality is holding us together, if it is. Is there a form of morality today that can hold us together? Zygmunt Bauman, the Polish sociologist, wrote a book and asked himself a question: what use is sociology? He argued that you had to, like Durkheim, you had to provide an account of the epoch and allowing people to think and how people think and connect and interpret their lives in a particular era. Now, according to Bauman, that we should not just analyze it, but we should try to provide and promote rules of moral contact, preparing the soil in which moral awareness can grow. And arguably, that's one of the things that I am thinking that we should be doing. I'll just move to that, that we should be doing. It's his analysis does in this modern era, which he calls liquid modernity. He says that the form of morality we have at the moment leads to a generation of freedom's children, and certainly in the West, we are very, very aware of young people who talk as if they have unlimited freedom of what they want, and they're encouraged to take, according to Bauman, to take responsibility for their own life project. Their life becomes an art form. And the moral certainties transmitted through education are now weakened. And in an age of this freedom's children, what we see is as Durkheim had already noticed, that individualism becomes a form of religion, a culture of personal dignity that has its own superstitions, a collective faith that is possible only by the ruin of all others. It becomes that civic religion which Bauman calls reflective individualization, means that instead of saying I am I, I think, therefore I am, it's replaced by I am I. This is me. This is my plan. This is my life. This is my choice. And any parent of a teenage girl will hear this language very, very easily. The language is of I, and girls are often seen now as the iconic symbols of this change. Although the women's movement fought for collective liberation and empowerment, actually, amongst girls is very much the expression of this notion of this is my life, this is me. And therefore, I begin to start thinking about the toxicity, the toxic nature of individualization, where they have to take individually determined moral responsibility. This does not necessarily lead to less inequality. It breaks some people out of existing structures, but it traps others in even greater inequality. It can produce insecurity, anxiety, it atomizes, it demobilizes. You could easily feel unworthy in this new world. It's also a new world in which the state, as a guardian of the universal rights to a decent and dignified life, appears to be withdrawing its role, leaving the responsibility to individuals. So the question is, how do education systems, the schools, the colleges, the universities, how does it address this new epoch, this epoch we're living in? And how does it prepare a new generation of youth for the social change that we've seen? How do we retrieve cultures of mutuality, altruism, and compassion? So I'm going to make two arguments in the time. The first argument that I've been working on is about creating using the notion of conscience collective, the notion that, of a global conscience collective, again, drawing from Durkheim, a collective consciousness. And I'm like Dr. Perez Esquivel and Professor Zambros, I think, that we are looking for global solidarity as the focus of a new morality. Now, education has a problem with this because education is fundamentally a modernist project. It's there to create national citizens for national social orders. It's very hard to create global solidarity in an education system. What I'm going to argue for are two very, in a way, controversial aspects. One is that the education should be controversial. It should deal with the controversies of a global world, what I call controversial education. And the other one is respect education, that we should focus in on respect. And I will explain why as I move along. The controversial element is linked to the notion of moral outrage at inhumanity, that we need a generation who can be angry at inhumanity, that they can see injustice and react to that injustice. And the second one is, as the UN Secretary General argued a few years ago, was that the two biggest, most powerful aspects are power and respect, that you need both. And somehow young people have to learn about power and respect. So if we take the first one, the global conscience collective, the challenge to inhumanity, what we've got as we move to human rights is we've moved away from national citizenship to the notion of personhood, a common humanity amongst people, a common humanity across the world. And that is, in a sense, a remoralizing the world. And it leads to a tremendous revitalization of human rights and an export of human rights across the world. The young people using this notion of personhood, that I can relate to anyone across the world, has to find some level of agency. And this is a challenge for education. Now, looking at what a number of authors have written, and they have written about global education, global citizenship education. There's a lot of literature on that. I just want to pick out three examples. The first one is the American philosopher Nell Noddings, and she would argue that you need a strong knowledge base, that young people in the curriculum, in the schools, should cover a long list of issues: global warming, genetic engineering, conflict with national citizenship, patriotism, peace education, caring, ethnic and religious diversity, gender and religion. The list is endless. And that would form a lot of the curriculum, but it could be weaved into different subjects. There's Martha Nussbaum, who talks about global values, and we should be encouraged cosmopolitanism, where everyone in the world is considered of equal worth. It's a very challenging agenda. Young people would be taught the ethics of compassion, the dignity of reason, and moral choice of every person, and that there would be shared values about engagement in global change, as well as increasing self-knowledge. There is a third one, which is that young people should have moral agency, where moral agency relates to resistance on the destructive, unequal effects of globalization and responds to the legitimate claims of the oppressed, and ultimately becomes a human being capable of love and imagination. It was interesting. There was an agenda. A number of people have talked about outrage. Oxfam, a leading charity, an NGO, has said that a young person should know how the world works, is outraged by injustice, and who is both willing and enabled to take action to meet this global challenge. These are very difficult, large agendas, and it does beg the question: how do you achieve it? My line, particularly from a gender perspective, is that gender power relations, looking at gender power relations, is one way of looking at this, the injustices in the world. It is only one, but it gives an idea of what sort of issues are not being covered in the education system. Dr. Perez-Esquivel argues, nothing is as powerful as the anger and outrage of women at injustice, a reality that we've seen so powerfully in Argentina. In my book, The Educating the Gendered Citizen, I identify three themes which would have the potential to become a focus of such a curriculum. Some of these elements are more controversial than others. The first one is gender inequality, diversity, and poverty. There is a sense in which the international development agencies have exported human rights and assumed that they are universal and they can be applied universally in every country. But this actually rather ignores the fact that countries have different cultures, different forms of social stratification, different power relations, and that there is a multiplicity of different ways of being a man and a woman in different cultures. And that by exporting those human rights as universal rights, it does produce potentially a conflict between us and them, the West and others. There's a real danger that human rights could be seen as another form of Western colonization without this sort of sensitivity. So a global conscience based on human rights alone is not sufficient. It needs to be the global citizen needs to be thinking about the connections between their world and the rest of the world. And the connections are obviously through a colonizing history. The connections on poverty and injustice, consumerism, the links between poverty and debt, and the rethinking how we live. And in that context, from a gender perspective, a young person perhaps might need to know, no matter what country, about what we call the global prowl, the global search for cheap female labor, which creates a vast global assembly line of casualized, feminized labor employed in low-paid, risky work in factories and sweatshops. The care deficit in wealthier countries, which pulls women from poverty-stricken countries into domestic labor away from their own families and children. America is an example of that. The international trafficking of women and children for prostitution. And the fact that almost 2/3 of 860 million adults who are illiterate are women. The majority of the millions of children who do not get to school are girls. So there's a whole range of issues that I would want the young generation to know about. Then there are the debates about the sexual and reproductive citizenship, which is a very contemporary debate about the different demands to link the human rights agenda to issues of women, non-binary, gay, transgender communities, the rights of protection from discrimination, violence, demanding new levels of tolerance and freedom in relation to private sexual lives. These are rights that cross between the public and the private spheres. So the discussions that young people know about, they've read about it on the web, they've talked to their peer group, they know about such things, but they haven't got the safe space really to discuss it. I mean, the discussion of sexual citizenship, a person could consider the individual's right to participate in sexual activity, to pleasure, to choose sexual partners, to sexual relations that are valued in the public domain, the right to sexual self-determination, the notions of respect, tolerance, and sexual association and expression. Reproductive citizenship. There are only some people who have the right to reproduce, others are denied, like the disabled or certain types of couples. That all the International Conference on Population and Development recognize that all women have a right to a satisfactory and safe sexual life and to choose when and how to reproduce. So it raises a question for young people: what is the role of the state? What is the role of the law in intervening in the private sphere? And this is something that could be talked about, could be discussed. And the third theme is about it's about the violence against women, the need to have peace. Women face gross violations of their human rights, and it is impossible to talk about human security and peace without talking about the experience of women, whether it's in the home or whether it's in the society or whether it's during a war. This is an area that is not always covered, and it is essential for a young person to realize what the gendering of peace and conflict. And this brings me finally to the second of my aspects, the respect education. There is a demand for a redefined humanism, and that demand means that we need to talk about justice and injustice at the intra and interpersonal level, the interpersonal realities, that people make judgments about difference. This is at the core of the forms of resistance that people have. Some forms of resistance are very positive, and some are extremely negative and hurt the people who resist. The desire for respect, and of all the research that I've supervised, all the qualitative ethnographic research that is now coming through, where people are being interviewed and observed and discussed with the young people, for example, you hear in their quotes, "I want to be somebody. I want to be somebody. I don't want to be a nobody. I want to be respected. I want self-respect. I want to stop others disrespecting me. I want to find ways of acting respectively." The word respect comes up time and time again in the quotes from people, whether it's youth, teachers, parents, a whole range of different members of society. Now, the issue of respect is one that it's embedded in the research, and we can now see it visibly in that data, that what people want is a form of respect. And I've argued for the form of gender respect. And again, using gender as a pathway into the topic. This again does not mean it's the only way in. In the notion of respect comes from respect for different gendered cultures, which I've already referred to, but there's also respect for the way in which gender actually is. There are different versions of gender relations. There are different versions of masculinity and femininity. There are different forms of gender agency that need respecting in different cultural contexts. For example, in Nigeria, they talk about Nego-feminism in West Africa. In Portugal, when we asked who is a good citizen, the Portuguese teachers said the grandmother. This is not the same in Britain. There are different definitions, the different moments when gender comes in. The second aspect of respect is when you get discussions about poverty, the development agencies often neglect to look at the women's experience of poverty as if it's the same as the man's. The relationship between gender education and poverty, what I call the poverty gender education nexus, is actually different for men and for women. The way they use education, whether it helps get out of poverty, needs to be noticed. Women need to be, their voices need to be heard in evaluating poverty alleviation strategies. The research that I've supervised from others about women as teachers and mothers, it's extraordinary how much the need for respect in the classroom with pupils, with teachers trying to deal with the lack of respect of female teachers, the vulnerability of female teachers in their communities, and the lack of respect perhaps, or the desire to be respected by mothers trying to educate their children living in poverty, supporting large numbers of children in school. And then finally, the desire for self-respect. The studies of youth cultures reveal that if, for example, in the townships of South Africa, you find the boys use violence when their mothers are disrespected. You find they try to gain peer group respect by violating girls because they seem to be looking more tough, or they get respect from challenging the law and going to prison because they've proved themselves. The girls expect to be respected by boys, but when they don't get respected, they find other ways to get self-respect to survive. So I'm arguing for controversial education and respect education as two ways to move forward to revitalize and replace the human rights agenda, to start to construct a new morality for the young people. I've not described the pedagogic work that would be involved, but I realized that this would be a huge issue of how to develop a pedagogy around such issues. And it's, as I said, it's not uncontroversial. Some people are very optimistic about young people today and see that they are addressing climate change, environmental destruction, that they're not as apathetic and they are getting involved. That others say, well, we need to do far more. What I've tried to say in my summary is what we need is the revitalization of human rights, the repositioning of it in a post-colonial world, the rights of all individuals to have rights, the encouraging of a global consciousness, and these are all agendas that an education system can address. And I'd like to finish with Dr. Perez Esquivel's comment when he said, we are moving from individualism towards a network of solidarity and shared struggle and hope for the people. We must strive for freedom, not singly, but all together. Thank you.
It's very excellent. It's very fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Martin Ueda, how are you?
Luis, can I start with your first question? You've asked about how power structures and systematic inequalities within the educational system perpetuate social injustice from a feminist perspective. What approaches do you propose to dismantle these structures? We have been working, since the 1970s in many countries on trying to reform the education system. I think if I have learned one thing that's the most important thing is that teachers are the insider reformers. Teachers are the reformers who can change this experience of girls. I've also learned a second thing, that each school has its own culture. It has its own catchment of pupils. It has its own community, and you cannot generalize one strategy across all different types of school. with all different types of children from different social class backgrounds, different ethnic groups, different language groups, etc. So the teacher becomes the researcher and the reformer, and the teacher finds out what is the experience of these pupils, the girls and the boys, in the school, in the playgrounds and informal areas, in the community. And they start to develop a discussion with the students about how they are learning, how they are experiencing the gender dynamic, particularly in a co-educational school. So that to me is the most important thing. When it comes to formal structures, of course, what we've learned is if you land up with options in the curriculum, girls and boys go in opposite directions, and one chooses the arts and the other one chooses the sciences. So in Britain, the only solution was to have a compulsory curriculum of set subjects that everyone studied to 16. This is definitely an argument that you cannot always leave everything to free choice, because the gender culture is embedded in the community. So you cannot just say you can choose, there is an opportunity here, you can choose. At the university level, there are all sorts of implicit hidden structures that are working. For example, embedded in the notion of assessment and evaluation of work, we found that young men were getting very high results, and young men were getting the first class degrees, and the young women were getting a little lower. And when we looked at it and said, for example, what is a good history essay? The history essay, the young man, it seems, wrote an essay to say, this is the reason why this happened in history, one reason, and argues. And the young woman says, no, there's this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. The evaluator says, the first answer is the best. The second answer is good. So there are assumptions, gender assumptions built into how we learn, how we evaluate learning, and that comes out in the results. So there is a worry that we may have different learning styles, or we've learnt different learning styles. So there are many hidden aspects of the structure, the hidden aspects of the process, and there are hidden aspects of the culture in the school. So one can't say, this is what causes the problem. It's far too complicated for that. But the work that's done is through research. And I'm a great believer in people in educational institutions doing their own research in the institution. So I hope that helped with the first question you've put up.
Thank you very much for your brilliant presentation. Professor Luis David Fernández Zambrano, the floor is yours.
That's right. That's right. One moment. Okay. Well, hello, good day, and sincerely, it's an enormous honor for me to share the table with such a distinguished colleague from the United Kingdom, and I will try to live up to these circumstances. And since ancient times, humanity has fundamentally by characterized by reflecting the mark of diversity in various ontological aspects that find expression in multiplex facets of reality. Yeah, one moment, please. Okay. As the most brilliant success of our time's expressions reminds us through the empire of the paper and parchment, fashion among the likes of the legendary laboratories, remote aquatics living manifestations are marked by physiological, biochemical, and morphological difference. If we all fundamentally wish to immerse ourselves in the official scientific memories in genetics, we can discover that the empire of diversity is present in the structural multiplicity of chromosomes and the various functions they fulfill in configuring the biological designs of beings that compose the plants and animal kingdoms. You will conscientiously dare to dive into the vast historical sea of literature and philosophy. We can discover that, since secular time, the two renowned branches of the human thought and the feeling have acquired different forms. Argumentative readings, interpretative stations, claimings of eloquence, and above all, direction where Promethean light have decided to eliminate the supreme effort of the or decorum. Here hides the backbone of humanity, creativity gradually asserting itself forcefully amidst the ranks of diversity of styles and stocks that had been the cradle of iconic manifestation from the likes of Homer, Plato, Aristotle, the scholastics, materialistics, romantics, and rationalists. This has shaped the legendary showcase of the knowledge from the dawn of civilization to contemporary times. On each of the hills of classical thought, difference emerged among the disciples of Aristotle, Marx, Thomas Aquinas, Hayek, Bertrand Russell, Mario Bunge, Shakespeare, or Jorge Luis Borges, just to name in the notable examples. Within each philosophical or literary bias, there is sure with indomitable for the necessity to seriously examine the established painting a landscape of diversity, ideological or interpretative color. The art of overcoming the back of deficient became the perfect brick to outline new chapter of human thought with unpredictable consequences. All these strategies bring within the long constellation of human thought and now resting in great temples of millennia-old knowledge transformed into majestic libraries, lead the citizens of our century through the winding starting of the universal culture in the juxtapositions there remain an infallible way to trace and validate these purposes that continue to represent humanity distinctive march. Such spiritual or material diversity as the great scholar of Bergson, Henry Bergson, time of the even Hegel, which categorized, explains the marvelous attire of humanity, heroically reciting the relentless and far passing of time. With that said, the most pertinent, the question would then be, what sense does it make to engage in fervent combat against diversity in the name of dogmatic defense of equality? Many vastly invoking the vast historical reservoir of legal senses can easily recall texts of the phrases from Locke or John Stuart Mill as impressive manifestation to endorse the unyielding tie of the constitutional legal creation that found their material expression in equality rights and the antidote against a civilized racist attitude of similar nation that undermine humanity dignity. In this regard, I believe that the legal framework that shape this legal system, now manifesting resolution in human rights, was forced in the further ago framed by the most intense thinker of past eras. However, it remains an imperative, the duty for anyone wishing to pass through the portal of the palace of visited to never forget Socrates, Maieutics, which represent the perfect key of successfully unlock the door and enter the monumental facilities of cutting-edge thought in the our 21st century. In the other words, daring intensely to doubt the established, venturing that the path of the differing for absolute agreement, and infinitely seeking refuge, is necessary in the 30 about of human reason, surrounded by the virgin hand where the rays of intelligence seldom dare to penetrate with strength and success. This wall to different fronts, the balcony of the Tao impressively demonstrate that equality, despite big fig of the good faith, is not exempt from new interpretation that aim to reconcile it more with reality than traditions. All these reasons lead us to think that the transformation of matter across its various specific of representation of creations stand keenly observed by Cavendish and also by Herodotus, proves to be the universal pass through with diversity, difference, and the blending of two have made their way through university and school atmospheres for many centuries. Indeed, it was from the source of diversity that heroic illuminating enterprise was launched, yielding fruitful results manifested in scientific and artistic creations that adorn continental life styles, facilitating communication, scientific exchanges, rational elevation, and scientific enhancing the quality of life for many of our fellow human beings. Above all, it served gallantly to uphold the values of solidarity and empathy with those suffering the worst injustices of our time. In other words, of this noble virtue resting in the label footprint of the new millennium of the direct existence to diversity across various temporal and spatial planes that have brought life of the university and school. However, many of us are aware that the majestic characteristics ignore only is valued by the new inhabitant of our times, who, in the relentless pursuit of the homogeneity, fundamentally decide to create the any talk that dare to diverge from the chorus of this time is very countries around of the world. Both university and school have become repository or complex of hard realities, where negative discrimination have predominantly take the root, excluding talents, opportunities, and promising prospects for scientific and cultural advancement. Along the same lines, we must remember for scientific and cultural advancement. Along the same lines, we must remember the exodus to Jewish talent from the realms of the science in the 1930s, the ceremony due to philosophy that sacrifice respect for diversity to sacrifice purpose. Notable examples include scientists of the caliber of Albert Einstein and Hans Craig. Classic case of science injustice, against reason. We can also look back the Middle Ages, where leagues of banquets primarily reflect the same animosity towards any difference as mechanisms that have to be rigorously obeyed. Resentment as common subjects undermine the fundamental pillars of the respect of diversity, diminishing in immense talent that was present. Therefore, this historical panorama provides as weak sufficient tools to deeply reflect of these severe problems that hatred toward those we think differently based on stereotypes, prejudices can pose for our century. We must be aware of the vast number of talents, opportunities, and how that kind becomes into the abyss by promoting or allowing these practices, which fundamental undermining the central pillar of civilizations. Mhm. It has the core reason why teacher and student are carefully examining this phenomenon. We unprecedentedly speak of the racism primarily combating the hate speech that unfortunately exists in many universities or schools worldwide, and about el striving of and the amorphy of intelligence and respect for diversity. Adolfo Pérez Esquivel perspective resonates intensely in our memory, encapsulated in the following: if I sing that everyone's maxing alive, then we are lost. We must learn to congruence with diversity. With difference is rational, tolerant manner. Unite strongly by Golden's bond of respect. In that vein, I believe that we colleagues like Pipanoric from Harvard University, we sanctifies against cancel culture. Educational leaders must earnestly grasp that diversity hold the impressive richness of humanity, from which the bright engines of social and scientific progress for our millennium will arise. And of course, education remains on the primary gateway to a past, the field of the point time, lest one act in must do now to prevent loss of hope and promise within our contemporary society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Luis David.
Martín, ya es one moment para cerrar. Quiero dar unas palabras de cierre.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, that's right. Yeah. It's a profound and sincere honor for you for our lecture hall to have received invaluable contribution of Madeleine Arnot on the understanding of Grant's talk and its impact of humanity. Her reflection had illuminated our path towards a deeper and more critical understanding of the contemporary challenge we face. We eagerly look forward to the possibility of meeting Hagen, perhaps in person, in the United Kingdom, to continue sharing perspective and exploring avenues that allow us to more effectively address the significant issues of our time. Her presence in the Wisdom Hub enriched this conference immeasurably, inspiring us to continue seeking solutions that promote the social justice, equality, and well-being for all. I wish you an wonderful afternoon from France. Uh, may you have much the success, happiness in the future and the hours. Warm regards and gratitude from Buenos Aires, Argentina, for you, for your people, for your country, for your university. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you for letting me join. Thank you. And I hope we continue our discussion. It's a very big topic, humanity.
That's
Thank you
right.
so much.
I'll be good. You are very brilliant. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye then.
Thank you very much.
I'll leave now, yes? Yes.